Please subscribe to my channel and like my video. Thank you for your support. Research in the forest. On a cool autumn day, a group of university students decided to conduct research in the forest for their biology class. The group consisted of biology students Melissa, Jane, Cassie, John, and Luke. Their goal was to study the forest ecosystem and document rare plant species. To make their research more efficient, they decided to camp in the forest for a few days. After obtaining the necessary permissions from their professor, they set out to establish a camp in a vast forested area. They parked their car at the forest entrance and walked to the campsite. The campsite was a beautiful spot by a lake, surrounded by tall trees. They spent their first day setting up their campsite and pitching their tents. The next morning, the group prepared their research equipment and began walking into the depths of the forest. Cassie took photographs of the plants and trees in the area, while John and Luke started examining insect species. Melissa and Jane headed to the lakeshore to collect water samples. During their research throughout the day, John and Luke found an old abandoned cabin deep in the forest. The cabin seemed unused for years. Overcome with curiosity, they entered the cabin and found old maps and strange symbols on the walls. These symbols were unfamiliar to them, and they took them along to decipher their meanings. That night, they gathered around the campfire. As the sun set, the darkness and silence of the forest began to unsettle them. Melissa examined the symbols they found in the cabin, while Luke and John decided to investigate the cabin's history. As the night progressed, they began hearing strange sounds. Rustling among the trees and distant whispers made them uneasy. Jane insisted that these were just the natural sounds of the wind and the forest, but Cassie claimed the sounds resembled human whispers. The next morning, the group continued their research, venturing deeper into the forest. However, Melissa suggested they should return, feeling that something was wrong with the forest. John and Luke, determined to complete their research, ignored Melissa's concerns. In the afternoon, John and Luke returned to the cabin they had previously discovered. This time, they found a door they hadn't seen before. When they opened it, they were met with a dark, narrow staircase. Succumbing to their curiosity, they decided to descend the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, John and Luke discovered an old, dusty basement. The walls of the basement were etched with the same strange symbols. In the center of the basement stood an old table with ancient books on it. The contents of the books told stories of spirits living in the depths of the forest and people who had gone missing. John and Luke, thinking these stories were merely legends, took the books with them. When they returned to the campsite, they realized Melissa and Cassie were missing. Jane said they had disappeared while collecting water samples by the lake. They all set out to search for them but found no trace. That night, John and Luke decided to examine the books they had found. As they delved into the books, John and Luke found more clues suggesting the forest was cursed. The spirits living in the depths of the forest punished those who disturbed it. Melissa and Cassie's disappearance could be part of this curse. As the night wore on, strange shadows began to appear around the campsite. Everyone retreated to their tents, feeling uneasy. John had a dream in which they were being watched by a dark entity from the depths of the forest. When he awoke, he thought he saw a shadow outside his tent, but when he looked, nothing was there. On the final night, the group gathered around the campfire. Melissa and Cassie were still missing, and everyone was on edge. John believed the entity he had seen in his dream was watching them, and that the spirits of the forest were restless. As the night progressed, strange shadows began to appear around the tents. Everyone huddled together in fear, waiting, when they suddenly heard a sound from the depths of the forest. It was the cries for help from Melissa and Cassie. John, Jane, and Luke ran toward the direction of the sound. They found Melissa and Cassie deep in the forest. However, they seemed as if they had come from another world, pale and silent. They remembered nothing and strangely claimed the spirits of the forest had sent them back. The group returned to the campsite with Melissa and Cassie. But when morning came, nothing was the same. The tents and belongings were scattered, and the forest had completely changed. It was as if the forest had reshaped itself overnight. The group decided to leave the forest and vowed never to return. However, the curse of the forest had not left them. As they departed from the campsite, the strange symbols and whispers in the sky indicated that the secret of the forest would never be solved and the spirits would never find peace. As they left the forest, the group decided never to speak of their experiences again. However, weeks later, John's dreams returned. Every night, he saw the same shadow and heard the same whispers. Jane woke up with deep scratches on her arm. Luke started seeing strange symbols in his house, and Melissa and Cassie constantly heard the same whisper return. One day, John, Jane, Luke, Melissa, and Cassie texted each other simultaneously. They all felt the forest calling them back. They knew they had to return, or the curse of the forest would never leave them. Finally, keeping the promise they made to each other, they decided to return to the forest. As they walked deeper into the forest, they got lost among the symbols and whispers in the sky. They merged into the secret of the forest, leaving no trace behind. As they walked deeper into the forest, the group felt lost. Everything was different from what they had seen before. The trees were taller, and the shadows were darker. As they went further into the forest, the strange sounds became more pronounced. Eventually, they arrived at a clearing. This clearing was next to the graveyard they had encountered before. In the center of the clearing stood a large ancient stone. It had inscriptions in a language they did not recognize. When Melissa approached the inscriptions, she felt an energy around the stone. As she touched the stone, a whisper echoed in her ear, "Sacrifice for eternal peace." John, Jane, Luke, Melissa, and Cassie gathered around the stone, discussing what to do. Melissa realized that the stone was a key and that a sacrifice was needed to lift the curse of the forest. She believed that sacrificing her own life could bring peace to the spirits of the forest. Melissa explained her decision to her friends. John, Jane, Luke, and Cassie tried to stop her, but Melissa was determined. She wanted to end the curse of the forest and save her friends. Approaching the stone, she placed her hand on it and began to pray. When Melissa's prayer ended, the inscriptions on the stone began to glow. A beam of light rose into the sky and spread over the forest. At that moment, the whispers from the depths of the forest ceased, and the wind died down. The forest was enveloped in silence. Melissa's body lay next to the stone. John, Jane, Luke, and Cassie watched their friends sacrifice in tears. The curse of the forest was lifted, and the spirits found peace. As they left the forest, the group vowed never to forget Melissa's sacrifice. They felt that the forest had found peace and made their way back. However, something still bothered them. They couldn't be sure if Melissa's sacrificed soul had truly found peace. When they returned to the city, they tried to continue with their lives. But at night, each of them heard Melissa's whispers. The whispers seemed to be trying to tell them something. One day, John had a dream where he was walking back into the depths of the forest. This time, Melissa was walking beside him. Melissa began to explain the secret of the forest to John, but the dream ended before John woke up. John, Jane, Luke, and Cassie realized that Melissa's spirit was still in the depths of the forest. Each of them remained affected by the experiences they had. John continued to hear Melissa's whispers every night. Jane woke up with new scratches on her arm. Luke began to see strange symbols in his house, and Cassie constantly heard the same whisper return. One day, the group members reunited and decided to return to the forest to understand why Melissa's sacrifice hadn't fully brought peace. They began walking deeper into the forest. As they walked, the dark and uneasy atmosphere of the forest enveloped them once again. As they walked deeper into the forest, the group arrived at the clearing once more. The large stone was still there, but this time, the inscriptions on it were different. The inscriptions provided information about a new task awaiting them. To completely lift the curse of the forest, each of them had to face and overcome their inner fears. The group members gathered around the stone, discussing their inner fears and anxieties. John revealed a fear that had haunted him since childhood. Jane shared a trauma from her past. Luke confronted his insecurities, and Cassie disclosed a secret she had been hiding for years. They felt Melissa's spirit guiding them. As each of them faced and overcame their inner fears, the atmosphere of the forest changed. The air grew heavy, the sky darkened, and the wind picked up again. As each of them fought to overcome their fears, dark entities emerged from the depths of the forest. These entities were physical manifestations of their fears. John fought a dark shadow as he faced his fear. Jane accepted her trauma and illuminated the darkness within her. Luke confronted his insecurities, looking fearlessly into the entity's eyes. Cassie revealed her secret, causing the dark entities to retreat. As each of them overcame their inner fears and pushed back the dark entities, the inscriptions on the stone began to glow once more. This time, the energy around the stone was stronger, and a beam of light rose into the sky. The whispers from the depths of the forest ceased completely, and the forest was enveloped in silence. Melissa's spirit appeared next to the stone. She thanked the group and told them she had found peace. Melissa's spirit ascended into the sky with the beam of light and disappeared. The curse of the forest was completely lifted. As the group left the forest, they felt a sense of peace and relief. Through Melissa's sacrifice and their own courage, the curse of the forest had been lifted, and the spirits had found peace. The experience in the depths of the forest had brought them closer together. When they returned to the city, they decided not to speak of their experiences. However, each of them found different ways to honor Melissa's memory. John wrote an article about the forest. Jane continued to study the forest's ecosystem. Luke planted a tree in Melissa's memory, and Cassie compiled their experiences into a journal. The secrets and mysterious events they experienced in the depths of the forest would always remain a memorable story. But the group members continued their lives, carrying the lessons learned from this experience. The curse of the forest was lifted, but the mysteries of the spirits would remain forever. The mysterious camp, a night of fear for math students. The beginning of summer vacation meant the realization of camping plans for the math class students at the university. The group decided to go on a weekend camping trip with their significant others to enjoy nature and relieve some of the stress from their studies. Emra, Burek, Elif, and Selin were sure that this getaway would be perfect. Each of them thought this was a great opportunity to spend more time with their partners. On a Friday, the four friends gathered the necessary camping supplies and set off into the depths of the forest. They chose a peaceful spot by the lake where Emra often went with his family as a child. However, there were many unknowns about this camping spot. When they arrived at the forest, they set up their tents by the lake and lit a campfire. Throughout the night, they sang songs and told stories, having fun. However, as the night wore on, the silence and darkness of the forest began to instill a sense of unease in them. Elif thought she heard a strange rustling coming from the depths of the forest for a moment, but she dismissed it as just the sound of the wind and did not mention it to her friends. As the night progressed, strange events began to occur. The campfire suddenly went out, and the air grew cold. While Emra was trying to relight the fire, he noticed a light coming from the opposite shore of the lake. It seemed as if someone was watching them from there. However, the light suddenly disappeared. The next morning, the group continued to enjoy the camp, albeit a bit uneasy. However, the disappearance of Burek's phone dampened everyone's spirits. While searching the forest for the phone, Aleph noticed strange symbols carved into the trunk of a tree. These symbols reminded her of an old ritual, but she couldn't quite figure out what it was. When night fell again, more terrifying events occurred. When Selen returned to her tent, she found her boyfriend Burek missing. A while later, Burek came running from the depths of the forest, breathless, saying he was fleeing from something. His eyes were filled with terror, and he was struggling to speak. The next day, the group decided to leave the camp. However, when they returned to the campsite, they found their belongings scattered and some items missing. Emra felt that things would get worse and insisted they leave immediately. However, they had difficulty finding the forest path. It was as if the forest had set a trap for them. While desperately searching for a safe place to spend the night, the group found an old cabin. When they entered the cabin, they discovered old books and strange ritual items. This began to make sense of the symbols they had seen on the tree and the missing items. Throughout the night, everything in the cabin seemed to come alive. The sounds coming from the walls and the whispers in their ears drove the group to the brink of madness. Emra, Aleph, Burek, and Selen decided to huddle together and wait for the morning. In the morning, the four friends were exhausted and weary. However, when they opened the cabin door, they realized that the forest had embraced them throughout the night. It seemed like there was no escape. However, a voice from the depths of the forest was following them. This voice fed their fears and revealed their deepest anxieties. When the group finally managed to leave the forest, it felt like waking up from a nightmare. However, everyone had the same question in mind. What did we really experience? When they returned to the forest to investigate the symbols and the cabin, they found no trace. This made them question whether what they had experienced was real. After the camp, the group tried to overcome this traumatic experience with the support they gave each other. However, the same thought lingered in everyone's mind. What was the forest trying to tell us? In the depths of the forest, a mysterious camp. Sarah and William had planned a quiet camping trip to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. They wanted to escape the stress of city life and spend a weekend immersed in nature. When William suggested a campsite he found online, Sarah immediately agreed. Both William's love for nature and Sarah's adventurous spirit made this trip appealing. Early in the morning, the couple set off on their journey. After hours of driving, they reached the campsite nestled deep within the forest. The campsite was a serene and peaceful area hidden among tall trees. As soon as they arrived, they set up their tent and lit the campfire. Sarah and William began to enjoy the unique scenery that nature offered. On the first night, they sat around the campfire and watched the stars. As the night progressed, strange noises from the depths of the forest caught their attention. Sarah felt uneasy for a moment, but William's calm demeanor reassured her. "These are just animal sounds," William said. "It'll take some time for us to get used to being in the forest." The next day, they decided to explore the forest. During their hike, they found an old, abandoned cabin among the trees. The cabin looked like it had been deserted for years. William wanted to examine the cabin, but Sarah hesitated to go inside. When they entered, they encountered old furniture and strange symbols drawn on the walls. These symbols were unfamiliar to both of them. They began to feel that something was wrong, but after examining the cabin, they returned to their campsite. That night, Sarah started having nightmares. In her dream, she saw a room full of people she didn't recognize in the cabin. These people were begging Sarah to help them. When she woke up, she struggled to shake off the impact of the dream. William noticed Sarah's unease and supported her. However, William had also woken up with a strange feeling that night. The campfire had gone out, and the sounds from the forest were becoming more distinct. Sarah and William decided to venture deeper into the forest. However, as they descended into the forest, they lost track of time. Suddenly, they noticed the sun was about to set and quickly tried to return to the campsite. But they had lost their way. In a panic, while wandering through the forest, they came across the cabin again. This time, the door of the cabin was open, and light was coming from inside. When they entered, they noticed the symbols on the cabin walls were glowing. Suddenly, the people from Sarah's dreams appeared. These were spirits who had gotten lost in the forest years ago and somehow became trapped in this cabin. William and Sarah heard their cries for help. These spirits needed the couple's help to be freed. William and Sarah tried to use the symbols correctly to free the spirits from this cursed place. After long efforts, the spirits were set free, and the cabin suddenly fell silent. But at that moment, the door of the cabin slammed shut, and the light from outside disappeared. Sarah and William realized they were trapped inside the cabin. A cold wind blew through the cabin walls, and a whisper was heard, "You'll stay with us." Forever, Sarah and William clung to each other in fear, but no matter what they did, they couldn't open the door. In exchange for the freedom of the spirits, Sarah and William were condemned to stay in the cabin forever. Deep in the forest, in a cabin known to no one, the story of Sarah and William came to a tragic end. Their disappearance remained one of the mysterious tales echoing through the forest. Thank you for listening.